Hello, this is a short video to summarize what happened in the second of my Friday lectures in semester B 2022. The focus was on writing concisely. These lectures are supposed to be interactive with elements of kind of writing and discussion, so it doesn't always make sense just to record the session and share it with you. So basically this video is a kind of overview of what we did, and you are welcome to try some of the exercises out for yourself. So actually started by looking at this sentence written in 1955 by an economist writer, and it's written almost as a kind of joke. It's written so that it looks a little bit like a law of physics, but it's a kind of law relating to work and procrastination and kind of time management or lack of time management. So Parkinson's law, you may have seen this before, is this: work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. And I asked students to write what they understood by this statement. And look what happened. As our starting point, work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. How many words is that? 3, 6, 9, 12 words. Okay. When I ask students, can you express what this means in your own words? What we found is that we kind of had 3 groups working on this. 2 of them came up with an explanation that used 24 words, so it kind of doubled the number of words required. And 1 person came up with 13 words. So this is like one of the problems I have with the general, just paraphrasing as a part of academic writing, is that often when we try to paraphrase something, we end up using more words to say it than we could use by quoting. And so what this highlights is a need sometimes to reduce the number of words that we use to say something, because if we're going to kind of paraphrase everything that we think is important from our reading, and we're writing an essay with a word limit of 1,000, 2,000, even 4,000 words, we are going to find that we cannot meet that word limit while also representing all the reading and thinking that we've done. So there you go. We started with a very neatly and cleverly written 12 word sentence. When we tried to write it into our own words, we ended up writing more. And I kind of did briefly suggest that there are ways of reducing the number of words we used here. So in these examples, we could remove things like "to my understanding," and so I could end up with Parkinson's law indicates that allocating more than the time needed to complete a task would lead to wasted effort. Or we can reduce the second sentence here even further. So people fill time with unimportant things and tend to procrastinate. We could just stop there, actually, leaving essential tasks till the last minute. I mean, I guess that's a definition of procrastinate. So we could just say people fill time with unimportant things and tend to procrastinate. Sentence C here is the shortest, but it starts with this word. This has to do with proper time management, structure, and material usage. And as writers of academic texts that we all are, we have a little bit of a problem with sentences B and C, because actually they give no indication of where this information comes from. And the word "this" doesn't refer to a text or an author that a reader will understand. So if you saw any of these 3 statements without knowing that I had asked students to write their own understanding of Parkinson's law, I think only sentence A would make sense. It's only sentence A that would tell you that this is about Parkinson's law. Okay, So partly I wanted to share Parkinson's law because I think it's really neat and really true, that actually if we have 3 months to write an assignment, it will take us 3 months to write an assignment. If we give ourselves 2 weeks to write an assignment, we'll do it in 2 weeks. So there are lessons to be learned from that. Same goes for word limits. If we give ourselves 2,000 words to write an essay, we'll write it in 2,000 words. If we give ourselves 5,000, we'll take 5,000. And that's one of the reasons why you get word limits at university. It's a challenge. It's kind of an intellectual challenge, and it's a writing challenge to answer questions in a limited number of words, and also in a limited period of time. Just as a kind of example of how writing concisely can be very beautiful and creative, but also potentially painful, I then introduce some examples of microfiction. Now, you may have seen this story before, often credited to Ernest Hemingway. It's a kind of epic and emotional story in just 6 words. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. And a typical interpretation of this story is that it's a tragedy. It's about a kind of a lost child who will never wear the shoes that were bought for it. As a parent myself, I'm very well aware that we often buy things that our children never wear. So perhaps it doesn't have to be so tragic. And of course, I did say that this story was often credited to Ernest Hemingway, but it was actually not written by Ernest Hemingway. There's a lovely story that says Hemingway was challenged in a bar and took up a bet. Some guy saying, I'll give you $10 or I'll buy you a drink, whatever, if you can write a short story in 6 words. And the legend goes that Hemingway wrote this story and then later said it was the best thing he ever wrote. Well, it's a lovely story, but none of that is true. The point, however, is that it is possible to tell a story in just 6 words. And it's also possible to be quite elegant in our writing in 6 words. Look at the kind of symmetry of for sale, baby shoes, never worn. Often successful advertising campaigns use like this, the power of the number 3. And this is a story that comes in 3 parts: for sale, baby shoes, never worn. So there's real craft, even if it's not Ernest Hemingway's, there's real craft in a sentence like this. And in the workshop, I asked students to read these 13 very short stories, choose one, and then discuss them. And if you want to do that, you certainly can. There are different elements to this exercise. Obviously, you probably need to pause the video here to read the short stories properly. But when you do, you choose one that you like. You think about how this will sound when you read it aloud. So that helps you to think about things like word stress and where you pause when you make a statement. I asked students to interpret, to explain what they think the story means, who it's about, what the situation is, what has happened, but also to explain why they chose that particular story. So in other words, what I'm asking you to do is to kind of quote it, to interpret it, and then to evaluate it, which you may recognize these words as quite common in things that you're asked to do in academic writing. But hopefully it's not too difficult to do that when you're working with just a 6-word text. There's an option of then, I asked students in the last workshop just to discuss this in a group, with the idea of, we were focusing on what we can achieve in just a short number of words. And I also wanted them to think about how the writers had gone through a process of, they had a story in their heads, they filtered it down and down and down to the essential ingredients, and then they maybe wrote a sentence. They might have written 50 words and got that down to 20 and then 10, until finally they're down to like the 6 most important words that still somehow tells their story. And of course, some of these are quite clever with that convention. But yeah, I wanted students just to talk about that. If you would like to do some writing practice around it, you can, by, instead of speaking to someone about your choices, you can write your answer to those questions. So yeah, you can write your answers to these questions, or you can have a discussion and then write your answers to these questions. And you're very welcome to email me with anything you produce, if you'd like some comments on it. Okay. The final thing that we did in the workshop, though, was really about texts that students who attended had read. And I gave them this instruction. Think about a text that you have read for your studies in the last week. Consider these questions. Who wrote it? Where and when was it published? What's the most important message in the text? And how does it help you, if it helps you at all? And when I say how does it help you, I think, you read at university either to prepare for a lecture, to prepare for a seminar, or to build on knowledge you've developed in a lecture or seminar, or of course you read in order to write assignments. So a lot of the reading that you're doing, I'm sure, is in relation to an assignment you're working towards, and you're reading, looking for information that's going to help you answer the question. So when you do read, bearing that question in mind, how does reading this help me? How does the message of this text help me? I think that's a very important question. And as a writing exercise, I think it's really valuable just to try to concisely capture the main details of a text, its message, and how it helps you. So I ask students to write 2 or 3 sentences to answer these questions, to count the number of words, and then to consider how many words they could remove without losing any of the meaning. And that's a basic exercise in improving your ability to write concisely. If you go to a gym for the very first time tomorrow and try and pick up the heaviest weight in the room, I'm pretty sure you won't be able to do it. But if you start with lighter weights and kind of multiple repetitions, and you work on you train your strength every day, eventually you will work up to being able to lift the heaviest weight that you want to be able to pick up, let's say. And I do think that, in many ways, that academic skills are no different. If we practice, we improve. Our writing will not magically get better just by listening to advice from someone like me or reading it on a website. Your writing is only going to get better if you practice it. So I think you need very short writing exercises that will help you to develop your precision and concision in writing, but it also won't fill up so much time that you don't want to do it or you won't learn anything from it. So I think doing something like this is a great way not only to keep track of everything that you're reading and organize your thinking for an assignment, but also to develop your writing. And the 3 students who attended the lecture that I did on Friday, the 4th of March, very kindly said I could use some of their writing to share with everyone else. So here's the first example. So the students started by writing a journal, which was co-written by Karen J. Pine, Hannah Bird, and Elizabeth Kirk, was published by the University of Hertfordshire in 2007. It postulated that gestures help people to think and speak. Okay, a slight correction was that it wasn't published by the University of Hertfordshire, but these are people who were working at the University of Hertfordshire, certainly at the time, and their journal was published in an academic. Their article was published in an academic journal, and there is a page on the university website which kind of summarizes that. Now, this student did a really good job of recognizing that actually the most important information in what they had written was this: gestures help people think and speak, and that the bibliographic information, the kind of the referencing detail about the authors, could go in brackets. Another student in the room pointed out that, you know, this idea that gestures help people think and speak doesn't belong in the past. It's not something that we're disagreeing with. It's probably still true now. So as long as we think it's still true now, we'll use the present tense and not the past tense. So we then change that to the third sentence here. Gestures help people think and speak. We then tidied up the reference because and this is one of the reasons that we format citations in the way that we do, whether we're using an author date system or whether we're using numerical referencing system or footnotes or endnotes. We want our pages to look quite clean and neat and concise. And that's why the information that we put in brackets is quite minimal. We don't include an author's first name. We don't include any initials. We just include the surname and the year of publication. And when there are more than two authors, we use the abbreviation et al. So we can use, because there are three authors here, we can say Pine and the others, Pine et al. And that brought us down to, well, we can say gestures help people think and speak, but since the only people who, sorry, the only species that think and speak are people, perhaps we can remove the word people from the sentence and then just say gestures help thought and speech. Okay, so now we've got five words and a reference, and we've written concisely, and we haven't really lost anything important, I think, because I don't think the student wanted to disagree with Pine et al. And so therefore, I think it's perfectly acceptable just to present this as, yeah, I think this is a fact. I'm presenting it as a fact. If you don't want to do that, though, and you might look at the first sentence that the student wrote and consider that postulate. Maybe postulate is an important idea here. Postulate or suggest. So if you want to keep that word in the sentence and you want to show some distance between yourself and the thing that you're reporting, then do it like in the final sentence here. Pine et al. Postulate that gestures help thought and speech. Okay, I thought that was a really nice example. Another interesting example was one member of the group is a really kind of fast writer, and she's a really good writer, as you can see from this paragraph that she wrote. I think she wrote almost 200 words, and was basically writing this almost like it was methodology. Here's something that I learned, and this is how I learned it. That's, it wasn't really what I asked. It wasn't what I was planning when I set the questions that I set, but I think it works perfectly well. You can pause and read this for yourself, but just as you can see, for this student, it seems to work to just like get everything down on paper. And if you can write fluently like this, and she writes with very, I don't see mistakes here. It's all good communication, but she's using a lot of words of course, because she's writing it out like a story. She's writing it out like a narrative. Now, it's fine to do that as long as you know when you're writing an assignment, you're not writing a story, you're not writing a narrative, so you narrow down to the most important detail that your reader needs to see. And so we went from this 180 word paragraph to one sentence. Tutorials point, host tutorials for programming languages at a range of levels. And that seemed to capture the most important thing that the student wanted to communicate from what they'd written. So two quite different approaches, actually, because the first student wrote a sentence and then immediately started reducing it down. The second student wrote a lot and wrote it kind of fluently in the same amount of time. And then I looked back, stood back, looked at what she'd written and thought, okay, so what's the most important thing here? And I have a lot of sympathy with that, because I think I personally write like that too. I'll often start with lots of ideas. I'll get them down, and often the first couple of paragraphs I write just kind of get me warmed up and lead me into the right space for the rest of my writing. But when I edit, I know I have to be really brutal and just get rid of that. So if you take this approach, great, but you have to be like me and the student who wrote this. You have to be prepared to lose 90% of what you've written, which is what she did. She reduced it down to about 10%. And I think when you're writing a 2,000 word assignment, you can kind of like write, look at the word count and think, I've written 2,000 words, I'm done. But sadly, no. If this is your approach, you probably need to get those 2,000 words right down as much as you can to give yourself more space to add more detail and engage with the question more fully. Okay. Last but definitely not least, this example is much more linguistic in terms of how we move from the first paragraph to the second. So, Urban Design Compendium by the English Partnerships and the Housing Corporation reflects on the evolution of urban design, which aims to deliver high quality, well-designed and sustainable places for people to live and work with a sustainable means of transportation without adding the level of carbon emissions. And look what happened. We ended up with the English Partnerships and the Housing Corporation reflect on, so far quite similar, except we lost the title of the text and we lost the name of the publisher because we know they will appear in our bibliography, so we don't need to include them in our sentence. The English Partnerships and the Housing Corporation reflect on the evolution of urban design, which aims to deliver high quality, well-designed and sustainable housing and workplaces which decarbonise transport. And notice that the process we went through here was really about finding the right expression, removing details that we didn't need, yes, but they were kind of linguistic details. So sustainable places for people to live. Well, we thought, what's another word for places for people to live? Okay, housing and work. Places for people to work, workplaces. So housing and workplaces, we reduced 7 words there, I think, to 3. So what did we learn from all that? Lessons you can take away. Here are 3 questions that can help you to make your writing more concise. So 3 questions to drive concise writing. Think about, what does your reader need to see? Okay, if there's something that your reader doesn't need to see or read, you can remove it. Which details can be removed without changing meaning? Okay, now this means that we have to be careful, not just brutal. So, for example, if you remember at the beginning, I had one quite long sentence saying Parkinson's law indicates that blah, blah, blah. And I had a much shorter, concise sentence saying this has to do with proper time. The problem with sentence C here is they needed to retain the detail of Parkinson's law. So changing Parkinson's law to this creates a more concise text. It doesn't help the reader. The reader will actually take much longer to read this sentence because they have to stop and think, this? What does this refer to? Who's this? What is it? Yeah? Okay. Whereas even though the first sentence here is longer, it's clearer and won't take as much time to read because nobody's fishing around to find out what it's about. Okay, so yeah, what can we remove, but what can we remove without changing the meaning and making life more difficult for the reader? And then linguistically, can we find more precise noun phrases that remove the need for extra words? So our example that we've just seen was places where people live, places where people work. Well, there's one word that expresses places where people live, and there's one word that expresses places where people work. And one final kind of overarching lesson to take from this is that writing is editing. They're not kind of separate things. We don't write and then we edit. editing is the writing process. The first bit of writing can be like the easy bit if you've planned well. But the real craft of good writing is about going back, reducing the number of words, finding better expressions for what you want to say, checking that you are not including irrelevant details, checking that everything is focused towards the answer to your question. And someone in the session last Friday asked a really good question about this. And yeah, I think it gave us the opportunity to establish that, yeah, actually, the writing process isn't just about getting words down on a page, but about manipulating those words so that they're the right words for you. And those 6-word short stories that we saw didn't just appear on a piece of paper as 6-word short stories. They would have had a life of their own. They might have started much longer and come down. They might have been a different 6 words, and the author would have really spent time working on them. So even though it's just 6 words, it doesn't mean it's easier to write than, say, 1,000 words. Okay, so that's all for me. If you have any questions or concerns or feedback for me, I'm very happy to receive it via my email address, which is m.holloway3@hearts.ac.uk. If you ever meet M. Holloway 1 and M. Holloway 2, I'd really like to meet them. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.